It was 3 in the morning when Danny Reeves first heard it. The monitoring station was quiet at that hour. Most of the crew was asleep. Danny was supposed to be running routine frequency checks, the kind of job that made your eyes heavy and your mind drift. He had done it 100 times before, and nothing ever happened. Just static. Just empty space doing what empty space does. But that night was different. The signal came in broken, cutting across 17 dead frequencies all at once. That alone was strange. Dead frequencies stayed dead. That was the whole point of them. Danny sat up straight in his chair and turned up the gain on his headset. The sound that came through made his stomach drop. It was not mechanical noise. It was not interference. It was voices. Alien voices, yes. But the one thing that needed no translation was a fear in them. That kind of fear sounds the same in any language. He had never heard anything like it in 4 years of monitoring deep space signals. He pulled off his headset slowly and just stared at a screen for a moment. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. He checked the reading twice, then a third time. The signal was real. It was coming from deep in the outer sectors, far past any human outpost. And whoever was sending it had been sending it for a long time, bouncing it off dead relays and broken satellites, just hoping someone would pick it up. Someone did. Danny got up from his chair and walked down the corridor to the colonel's quarters. He knocked twice. When the door opened and Colonel Frank Hayes looked out at him with tired eyes, Danny did not waste time. "Colonel," he said quietly, "you need to hear this." Hayes listened to the transmission in full without saying a word. Then he asked Danny to play it again. He stood there in his undershirt and old boots, arms crossed, jaw tight, listening to a species beg for his life from across the stars. The translation software was rough and incomplete, but it filled in enough. These were the Vreth, a small civilization, peaceful from what the data suggested. They were not soldiers. They were not fighters. They were just people being hunted down world by an empire called the Korix. They were not asking for weapons. They were not asking for an army. The message was simpler than that, and somehow that made it worse. They were asking someone to please make it stop. That was it. Just make it stop. Like a kid in a schoolyard who has been knocked down too many times and just wants one person, any person, to step in. Hayes stood quietly for a long moment after the second playthrough ended. The room was still. Outside the small porthole window, the stars were cold and distant and completely indifferent to everything happening beneath them. He uncrossed his arms, picked up the direct comm line, and when the operator answered, his voice was flat and clear. "Give me Admiral Cole," he said. "Right now." Danny walked back to his station alone. He sat down in his chair and put his headset back on. The signal was still coming in, faint and broken, looping the same desperate message over and over into the dark. He did not turn it off. He sat there and listened because it felt wrong to not listen. Somewhere out there people were dying, and the only thing they had left to do was send their voices into void and hope. He kept the channel open all night. By the time the sun came up over the station's solar panels and the rest of the crew started filtering in with their coffee cups and morning talk, Danny had not slept at all. He did not mind. Some things you stay awake for. Some signals you do not let go to static. He just kept listening. And far away, in a secured office with bad lighting and cold coffee, Admiral Grace Cole was already reading the full report. Grace Cole did not sleep that night either. She read Danny's report twice, then the full Vreth transmission analysis, then the Korix Empire file that intelligence had been quietly building for the past 3 years. She sat alone in her office with the lights low and went through every page. By the time she was done, the coffee on her desk had gone completely cold, and the station outside her window had shifted from night crew to morning crew without her noticing. Then she picked up her pen and wrote 4 words. That was the message humanity sent to one of the most powerful empires in the known galaxy. 4 words on a formal diplomatic channel, transmitted in 17 languages, including 2 Korix dialects, so there would be absolutely no confusion about what was being said. No long letter, no list of demands, no carefully worded political language designed to soften the edges. Just 4 words, plain and direct. Stop. This is final. Her communications officer asked if she wanted to add anything else. A follow-up, a deadline, something that gave the Corax a way to respond without losing face. Grace looked at him for a moment and then shook her head, for words were enough. Either they understood or they did not. The Corax understood perfectly. They just did not care. Their response came back in under an hour. It was long, much longer than 4 words. It was the kind of message that powerful people send when they want to make sure the other person knows exactly how small they are. They called humanity a footnote in galactic history, a species that had barely crawled out of its own solar system 200 years ago, still figuring out how faster-than-light travel worked, while empires like the Corax had been ruling star systems for thousands of years. They said Grace Cole's message had been read aloud in their command hall, and that it had gotten a good laugh. They said humanity should be grateful. It had not yet drawn serious attention to itself. Grace read the whole thing, every word. She did not rush it. Then the second transmission came in, and this one was not words. The USS Harlow was a small observation vessel, 12 crew members. It had been sitting quietly in the outer sectors doing exactly what its name suggested, watching, recording, staying well out of anyone's way. It was not a warship. It was not armed in any meaningful sense. It was just a ship full of people doing a quiet job in a quiet corner of space. The Corax destroyed it in a single pass. No warning. No communication. Just gone. Captain Bill Turner's last transmission lasted 3 seconds. It was not even a full sentence. The channel simply opened. There was a sound of alarms in the background, and then nothing. Static. Then the kind of silence that sits differently than regular silence. The kind that fills a room and stays there. Grace Cole received the casualty report 40 minutes later. She read it standing up, which was not something she normally did. She read every name. All 12 of them. Then she folded the report in half, walked to her desk, and set it down in the center of it, and stood there with both hands flat on the surface for a moment. General Ray Mitchell was standing near the door. He had been there for a while, quiet, waiting. He was a tall man who did not use extra words, and Grace had always respected that about him. She looked up at him. "Plot the course," she said. Mitchell did not ask which course. He already knew. "Home space," he said. "Home space," she confirmed. That was the whole conversation. Within the hour, fleet commanders across 7 sectors received their orders. No public announcement was made. No speech was broadcast. No reporter was briefed. The politicians would find out when everyone else did. This was not a decision that needed a press conference. It was not a declaration of war dressed up in careful language. It was something quieter and something much more serious than that. Across the dark between the stars, engines began to ignite one by one. Massive ships, patient and unhurried, turned their noses toward Corax space and started moving. 12 names on a folded piece of paper. That was the whole reason. That was enough. Euthos had never lost a battle. In 40 years of commanding Corax warships, he had fought 17 engagements and won every single one of them. He was not a man who doubted himself. He was not a man who lost sleep over enemies. When the report came in that a human fleet was moving in his direction, he had actually felt something close to amusement. He ordered his commanders to assemble everything they had anyway, not because he was worried, but because he wanted to make a point. He wanted the humans to see what real power looked like up close before they turned around and went home. 6,000 warships. That was what he assembled. Ancient vessels with hulls that had survived wars humanity had not even known were happening. Crews who had been fighting longer than most human officers had been alive. He arranged them in a formation that had crushed 3 other civilizations in the past century alone, and then he stood on his bridge and waited. When the human fleet finally appeared on long-range sensors, he leaned forward and looked at the numbers. Then he almost laughed out loud. They were outnumbered 30-1. 30-1. He had fought worse odds than that on a bad day. He turned to say something to his first officer, something about how this would be over before lunch. And that was when his sensor officer made a sound that stopped him cold. It was not a word. It was just a sound. The kind a person makes when something happens that their brain has not caught up to yet. Euthos turned back to the display. The human fleet had not dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system the way every navy in the galaxy always did. That was the standard approach. You came out at the edge, you formed your lines, you advanced. Everyone did it that way because dropping out of FTL inside a system was considered nearly impossible. The gravitational calculations alone were enough to tear a ship apart if you got them even slightly wrong. It took either extraordinary technology or extraordinary stupidity to attempt it. The humans had done it anyway. They had dropped out not at the edge of the system, but inside it, inside the formation itself, between the Chorix ships, all around them, everywhere at once. Before Euthos could open his mouth to issue a single order, the night outside his viewport turned completely white. He never did issue that order. The battle lasted 9 minutes. That number would be repeated across the galaxy for years afterward in tones that ranged from disbelief to quiet fear. 9 minutes. 6,000 warships in 9 minutes. People who heard it assumed the number was wrong. They asked for clarification. They were told no. That is correct, 9 minutes. And then there was usually a long silence after that. Danny Reeves watched it from the tactical station aboard the flagship USN Robert Price. He had been reassigned 3 weeks earlier, pulled from a monitoring post, and put on the ship because they needed experienced signals officers, and he was the one who had first picked up the Vreth transmission. Someone up the chain had decided that was relevant. He watched the display the whole time, every movement, every exchange. He had expected to feel something dramatic when it was over, some kind of rush, some release of the tension that had been building since that night. He first heard those broken alien voices begging for help across dead frequencies. He did not feel any of that. When the display finally went still and the 9 minutes were done, he just sat there looking at the screen with a quiet, heavy feeling sitting in the middle of his chest. It was not pride. It was not excitement. It was something harder to name. The kind of feeling you get when something very serious has happened, and you understand that the world on the other side of this moment is going to be different from the world before it. Nobody on the bridge spoke. Then General Mitchell's voice came through on the fleet wide channel. It was calm, completely flat, like a man reading a grocery list. "Move to Phase 2, he said. Danny looked down at his hands. Then he went back to work. The messages started coming in before the smoke had even cleared. The Galactic Council was the closest thing the known galaxy had to a governing body. Dozens of species, hundreds of representatives. Centuries of political tradition built on the idea that everything, absolutely everything, could be resolved through conversation if you just used the right words in the right order. They believed in process. They believed in procedure. They believed that no matter how bad things got, there was always a table somewhere that reasonable people could sit around and work things out. They sent their first message to Admiral Cole 40 minutes after Phase 2 began, then another one, then 3 more within the same hour. By the time 6 hours had passed, they had sent 43 separate communications through every official channel available to them. Formal diplomatic requests, emergency appeals, direct personal messages to Grace Cole herself, messages copied to Earth's political leadership, messages flagged as urgent, messages flagged as critical, messages with the Galactic Council seal stamped across the top in the kind of bold official lettering designed to make people stop what they're doing and pay attention. Humanity answered none of them. Not one. Not even a short reply acknowledging receipt. Nothing. The silence from a human side was so complete that several council members apparently convinced themselves there was a technical problem with the communication relays. There was not a technical problem. Grace Cole was receiving every single message just fine. She read most of them. She just had nothing to say to any of them yet. She sat in her command chair on the bridge of the Robert Price and directed each strike herself. Chorix shipyards went first, the big ones that had been churning out warships for 3 centuries. Then the military stations positioned along their border sectors. Then the weapons depots buried in the outer moons of their system. Then the command installations. Every structure that existed to project military power, to build it, to store it, to coordinate it, gone, taken apart or destroyed with a level of precision that left everything around it untouched. No accidents, no collateral, just a war machine, piece by piece, methodically removed. Her coffee went cold beside her. She did not notice. Her eyes stayed on the map the entire time. She spoke in short, clear sentences when she needed to direct something, and said nothing when she did not. The crew around her worked quietly. There was no energy in the room that felt like victory. It felt more like people doing a necessary and serious job, and doing it carefully, because the situation demanded care. The council ambassador reached her on an open channel somewhere around the 5th hour. He had clearly been trying to get through for a long time, and was not in a calm state when he finally did. He was loud. He used words like restraint and proportionality and diplomatic solution, and he said them with the kind of urgency that powerful people use when their use of those words making other people stop and listen. Grace let him finish. She did not interrupt once. She sat in her chair and looked at the map and let him say everything he wanted to say until he ran out of breath and the channel went quiet. Then she reached over and unmuted her own mic. "Ambassador," she said. Her voice was not angry. It was not cold exactly. It was just very steady and very clear. "How many Vreth distress signals did your council log before ours?" There was silence on the other end. The kind of silence that means a person knows the answer and does not want to say it out loud. Grace did not wait long. 81, she said. "You logged 81 separate distress signals from the Vreth over the past 4 years. You responded to 0 of them. Not one. You filed them and you moved on." She paused for exactly 1 second. "So I'm going to need you to explain to me which part of this you feel requires my restraint." She cut the channel. The bridge was completely quiet. General Mitchell was standing a few feet away. He looked at her. She looked back at him. There was nothing dramatic in the exchange. Just 2 people who understood each other. "Continue," she said. Mitchell turned back to his station. The map kept updating. The work continued. Outside, among the stars, the last of the Chorus war machine was coming down. When it was over, the galaxy expected fire. That was what empires did when they won. They made sure everyone knew it. They planted flags and gave speeches, and held the moment up for the whole galaxy to see. They wanted credit. They wanted fear. They wanted to be remembered as the ones who had done this thing and crushed that enemy and stood victorious over the remains of whoever had been foolish enough to stand in their way. Humanity did none of that. When the last Korix military installation went dark and the operation was officially complete, there was no announcement, no broadcast, no message sent to the Galactic Council declaring victory or laying out new terms or demanding anything from anyone. The human fleet simply stopped, held their positions, and waited for the next set of orders, which turned out to be not more strikes, but something else entirely. Resettlement operations. The Vreth were coming home. Captain Mike Lawson had not fired a single weapon during the entire campaign. He commanded a transport vessel, not a warship, and his job from the beginning had been logistics. Moving supplies, coordinating landing zones, working out the quiet, unglamorous details of how you actually get to displace people back to the worlds they came from when those worlds have been occupied and stripped and left in rough shape. It was slow work and complicated work, and most people back home would never hear about it or know his name. That was fine with him. He had not signed up for the attention. He was standing on a hillside on one of the Vreth homeworlds on a gray morning when the first transport ships came down to the cloud cover. He had been there since before dawn helping the ground crew prepare the landing area. The grass under his boots was a dark blue color, short and thick, and the air smelled like something between rain and pine. Not unpleasant, just alien in a way that reminded you constantly that you were very far from home. He watched the ships land one by one, and then watched the ramps come down, and watched the Vreth walk out into the open air of their own world for the first time in what for many of them had been years. They were quiet. That was the thing that struck him most. He had expected something more visible from them. Relief, maybe, or emotion of some kind breaking through. But they came down the ramp slowly, and they stood on the ground, and many of them just looked around without saying anything, like people who had been told good news so many times before that turned out to not be true, that they were waiting to make sure this time was real before they let themselves feel it. Lawson stood to the side and just watched. He was not sure what his face was doing. He was not sure what the appropriate expression even was for a moment like this. An old Vreth came down one of the ramps near the end of the group. Small, gray, moving carefully with a walking staff that had been carved by hand from some dark wood. For pale eyes that had seen more years than Lawson could guess, the old one moved slowly across the ground and then stopped directly in front of him. Just stopped and looked up at him. Lawson did not speak Vreth. He had maybe 15 words of it, and none of them seemed right for this moment. He did not say anything. The old Vreth did not say anything either. After a moment, the old one reached out and placed one hand flat against Lawson's chest, right over the center of it, held it there, not pressing hard, just resting. A few seconds passed. Then the hand came away and the old Vreth moved on down the hillside without looking back. Lawson stood there for a long time after that. He was not sure how long. Long enough that when his crew came over and asked if he was all right, and he said yes, just give me a minute, and she nodded and left him alone. He was looking out at the valley below, where the Vreth were spreading out slowly across their land. Families finding each other. People sitting down on the ground just to feel it under them. Back in the wider galaxy, things were changing, quietly, with no connection admitted and no explanation offered. Old empires that had spent centuries treating smaller species as inconveniences or resources were suddenly reviewing their policies. Treatment of minority worlds improved. Certain practices that had been standard for generations were discontinued without announcement. Representatives who had ignored distress signals for years started responding to them. Nobody said why. Nobody referenced 9 minutes in Korrick space out loud. But everyone knew. In the private meeting rooms and the command halls and the political chambers of 100 different civilizations, the same quiet calculation was being made. Humanity had not wanted glory. Humanity had not asked for territory or payment or a seat at any table. They had simply seen something wrong, warned the people doing it once, been ignored, and then responded in a way that left no room for any further conversation on the matter. That was the part that stayed with people. The one warning. The patience before it, and the certainty after it. Most empires rattled their swords for months before doing anything. Humanity had sent 4 words and then acted. No performance. No escalation ladder. Just a clear line, and then consequences when a line was crossed. Nobody wanted to find out where their line was. So the galaxy changed. Not with a treaty. Not with a summit. Not with any of the grand political machinery that the Galactic Council preferred. It changed the way things change when people are quietly afraid of making a mistake they cannot take back. One small decision at a time. One ignored distress signal answered instead of filed. One species treated with basic decency that would not have been 6 months earlier. Mike Lawson did not know any of that standing on that hillside. He was just a man watching people come home. He picked up his radio after a while and got back to work, coordinating the next wave of transports coming down through the clouds. The blue grass moved in the wind around his boots. The sky above was wide and pale and quiet. And somewhere out there in all that dark between the stars, the small and the frightened and the hunted were sleeping a little easier than they had in a very long time. Not because the galaxy had suddenly become a kind place. It had not, but because something had shifted in it. Some unspoken rule had been written into the fabric of how things worked out here. Hurt the helpless, and humanity will hear about it, and humanity remembers.